I work really hard. I'm very proud of the work that I do. Like, whatever it is, I want to put my 110% in it. And I'm very concerned, despite me trying so hard, I will be next. Like, literally, I could be next week on getting laid off. And where does that leave me?
Who's been fired? They're all still living. Isn't that amazing?
But I've been thinking about this, like doing my brand fully for like since I started in 2017, right? I've taken like a bunch of hiatuses, so.
What's stopping you from going all in?
So I actually wanted to utilize my MBA, and I was working in the luxury industry, right? And it's been 18 months, and I'm done. I'm like, I just got fired like 2 weeks ago, so I'm just like, you know what? I'm going.
Round of applause. Okay, all right. And now you have the chance to go be you.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, you know, does that ultimately your values, like you said, I've become me multiple times, you know, but like ultimately I still want to be this version of me. You know?
Yeah, now it's time for you to unleash. Hi, it's Suzy Welch. Hi, welcome to the Becoming You podcast. Welcome for the first time or welcome back. I'm really glad you're here. What you just heard were two voices of two becoming youers, two people who have gone through the Becoming You methodology. They excavated their values, they identified their aptitudes, and they pinpointed their economically viable interests. And lo and behold, the process worked for them and they found their purpose, and now they're living it. But as you could tell, there's trouble in paradise. Isn't there always trouble in paradise? Isn't that life? Even when it's good, it's complicated. And so we are going to see if we can fix the trouble that they are having this week on the pod. Just that. Now, if you were with us last week, you heard the first installment of this live from New York version of the podcast, where we heard from people talking about actually following their Becoming You path and how it's going. And this is the second installment. Now you're going to hear from Molly, who is grappling with the trade-offs of her purpose journey, bringing her face-to-face with job insecurity, and from Tim, who wonders, once you've found your purpose, like what's even next? I think that this question that Tim has is vaguely existential, but also very real, and it kind of reminds me of that Billie Eilish song, I Had a Dream, I Got Everything I Wanted. So stand by for the next chorus of that song from me. Now, just a little context before we get going. The stories you're about to hear are the happy outcome of one of my craziest ideas in recent years, which was a Becoming You reunion. And it was crazy because, you know, schools have reunions all the time. I get that, right? NYU, where I teach, has reunions all the time. I get to speak at them. It's fun. But I don't know how many actual, like, classes have reunions. Like, I never went to an industrial marketing reunion, okay? Maybe they're out there. I don't know. And I definitely know I wouldn't go to an industrial marketing reunion. But all I know is that one day, right after the semester for Becoming You ended, like in March or something, I was like, I just hate saying goodbye to the Becoming You people. I want to hear the rest of their stories. And so we ended up emailing everyone who's ever taken a Becoming You class at NYU or has taken any of my open enrollment workshops. I mean, we're talking about people in Madagascar, South Africa, Germany, you name it. And we said, hey, anybody down for a reunion? And every morning I would come down and they would say, guess what? Like, we got another, X number of people. And it ended up a couple hundred people showed up, which was fantastic. And one of the parts of it was we did a live AMA session about what you do with your Becoming You answer once you have it. Because actually that is what Becoming You does as a method. It gives you answers. It helps you excavate your values, which a lot of people don't know, frankly, and your aptitudes. Again, this is data we should have, but we typically don't, which is why it's part of the Becoming You process, and your economically viable interests. All that data we excavate as part of the method. And then when you have it, it helps you figure out what lies at the overlap of those three data sets. And that's where Becoming You says you'll find your purpose. But, and this is a real thing, sometimes actually stepping into your purpose, living it, pursuing it, finding it, leaning into it, when you've figured it out, it comes with complications. Sometimes you have to undo some stuff. Sometimes you have to tell people stuff. And that, my friends, the sort of complications of living your purpose are what we were focused on at the reunion and what we're talking about today. This is Becoming You. Anyway, as I said, this is Becoming You, and I'm Suzy Welch, your devoted host. I'm a professor at NYU Stern School of Business, and this podcast is named after my class there, and it's actually also the name of my book, which is just out. And again, as a reminder to listeners, both new and old, Becoming You is a methodology that I designed to help people answer the question, what the heck should I do with my life? Which is, obviously one of the biggest, if not the biggest question we ever ponder. And sometimes the truth is we don't know the answer to it. We never find it. We just keep kicking it down the road, and we kick it down the road, and we kick it down the road, and we keep living by default. Okay, by reaction to everything, default. That's the first of the 3Ds, by the way. I talk about the 3Ds all the time. The first, they're the way to live, 3 different ways to live. You can live by default, just reacting to everything. That's what happens when you don't know your values and you don't know your aptitudes, you don't know your interests, and you just sort of bump along and you react to and you know what? This is not the purview only of people who appear unsuccessful. Let me be very, very clear. There are people who appear wildly successful, highly renowned professionals who are completely living by default. Okay, they're just on autopilot. They're on a conveyor belt. They kind of know what they should be doing to perform, but it's all performative, and you just react and you react. And sometimes you just are living by default because you have so many people you love and you're trying to make them happy. I was giving a speech in Boston the other day, surrounded by it was like the most powerful, successful women in Boston, all put together for this fantastic luncheon that I was speaking at. And when I started talking about default, you could have heard a pin drop. And I was there. I was that person. I get it. When you've got kids and partners and bosses and boards that you're on, you can just ricochet around, and that's living by default. But there's a better way. The second way is by living by deliberation. That's the second D, and that's when you start to sprinkle some intentionality in. You start thinking, hey, that's not one of my values, or I'm not particularly good at that, or I've never been very interested in that. I'm going to try to get control of my life. But look, the third D, which is what Becoming You is about getting you to, that's living by design. That is hard. We call that your area of transcendence. When you are living by design, where you're living your values and your aptitudes and your interests, you're right at the center, living your purpose. That's the third D. And what we really dug into at the reunion was what happens on the way to your area of transcendence, what happens on the way to living by design, because it's not a straight line. It's not a flat road. It's hard. You got to fight for your purpose. And we're going to hear about that today from 2 people. So the first question we took was from Molly, who was just a wonderful student who I came to love. And as you have, if you've listened to any podcast before this one, you know I love them all. But I love Molly, and she identified her purpose in class. She was a student who really gave the class her all, and she decided what she wanted to do. She'll explain it in the tape you're about to hear. And then she went and got that job, and only to find out that her right destination had some stuff associated with it that was not what she was counting on. And she discovered her purpose came with some job insecurity. And by the way, and this is not incidental, if you're a person who has been fired or fears being fired, and actually, who does not fear being fired at some point or another, you're going to want to listen to this part of the podcast, because I actually end up explaining I'm going to say it because it's going to sound weird, but I'm going to explain the silver lining of being fired, maybe even the gold lining of being fired. I do that. Okay. So just stand by. After Molly, you'll hear from Tim, who was in the very first cohort of Becoming You when I first started teaching it. And his question is not about whether or not he's landed in the right place, but how often we can change that right place. So let's get going with part 2 of Live from New York. It's Becoming You. All right. I know Molly is here. Molly, come on up.
Okay, so what do you do when you're feeling a little bit lost after a career move? I joined the startup world, and I love some aspects of it. I love how fast-paced it is. I love the challenges, but I'm struggling with the lack of job security. There's been multiple rounds of layoffs at my company, including someone on my team this week, and while I wasn't impacted, I'm not feeling great about the runway. So I feel like I know my values and my aptitudes, but I think I'm struggling a little bit with trying to take that next step and feeling like maybe I made the wrong move by joining this company. And how do I not repeat that mistake in my next one?
Okay, fantastic question. Some people do take moves after they do the Becoming You process, and then they make the move, and you sort of are like, okay, wait, maybe there was something I wasn't counting on in this space. So give us a little background about what you used to do and what you ended up doing, and what are your top values?
Sure.
And so I know it's high scope, isn't it? It's curiosity, which would be high scope. Okay, go ahead. Tell us some background.
So I did my MBA part-time at Stern while working full-time at a large CRM company where I spent the past 9 years. And then in November, I made the jump to a startup. And if you remember from Becoming You, I was like, I want to be a chief of staff. And so I applied to be a chief of staff. And this startup was like, we don't want you for that role, but we'll give you this other role, which is more of like a general manager, which was a great move. And if I'm being really honest, I then got to witness my chief of staff get sort of like beat around by my CEO, who's a very smart individual. So I love being in tech and I love being within like the software industry as a whole. But I think I'm struggling with trying to really understand where I may be best fit in within that industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think okay. So I remember so clearly in class you saying something, and why did I remember it? Because it resonated so much with me, and I actually sometimes use it as an example of somebody with high scope. You said, "I want an interesting life." Okay, that's a very common presenting phrase for somebody who has high scope. I want an interesting life. You can say a lot of things about what you want, but if the first thing you say is "I want an interesting life," my head goes bing, bing, bing. Scope. Is Kristen here? She said to me the other day, "I want to touch everybody's brain." That's another high scope indicator, right? I want to touch everybody's brain. I was like, oh my God, that is scope, scope, scope. So sometimes we have a value, a strong value. And it could be high scope, it could be high family centrism, it can be achievement, and then we encounter it in the wild. Okay, so you have that interesting life you wanted, okay? And at that moment, either we have to take a look and we have to think, okay, did I want this value for identity reasons? Did I want this thing because for any kind of reason, or is it in me? And yet actually my encounter with it is calling on me things that are hard. Like, okay, you're looking around and you're saying like, there's job insecurity. And what I wonder is where affluence falls in your values, because high scope and high affluence can be in conflict, okay? Because if you have a big, exciting life, you've got to think about the implications for whether you can make a lot of money, because high risk equals high reward, but not right away. So what do you think is making you so nervous about because you wanted an interesting life. What's making you so nervous about it? I mean, nobody likes to be fired. Okay. And so there may be an identity issue going on here where the very successful person you've always been is like, oh gosh, I could lose my job.
I think that's exactly it, where I work really hard. I'm very proud of the work that I do. Like, whatever it is, I want to put my 110% in it. And I'm very concerned, despite me trying so hard, I will be next. Like, literally, I could be next week on getting laid off. And where does that leave me?
Who's been fired? They're all still living. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's like I wish I'd been. I know this is going to sound crazy. My firing was really ugly. It was terrible. It was in the Wall Street Journal when I ran off with Jack and I got fired. And I wish it had happened in a way earlier in my career, because I realized you live. And you think everybody is going to be looking at you like, ugh. And actually what ends up happening is people like you better. Your friends love you more. Your humanity shows. You become more empathetic because you've been through it. And then you think, I mean, you will be able to live your scope more fully once you realize that you get knocked down and, like the song says, you get up again. So that having been said, what may be going on is you may have had an identity issue that made you want high scope, but the true scope value is somewhat lower. But I know it sounds crazy to say don't be scared of being fired, but once you've been through it, has anybody want to volunteer having been through it and lived? Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lee. I resonate with what you're saying, but I also was just going to share, I've gone through 3 layoffs in a row, every single one. And the first one was so personal. And I was a high performer, but I was like, this was my fault somehow. Sorry, sorry, 1 second.
No, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And part of this is not my fault, but I wanted to torment myself and went to a smaller and smaller startup with every move, which is more high risk, high whatever. And so the second one, you realize like it has nothing to do with you. Like I remember asking the VP, I knew layoffs were coming. I was like, just tell me. And he was like, no, you're not. And then I was. And then with the third one, I was told, you are the gem of this company. You make all of the difference, but you cost too much money. And so like, even if you, like you saying like, I want to do everything to protect my job, like you just can't. And like and you do live and it's fine. And if anything, it makes it more valuable as you start to look at other startups to be like, okay, am I asking the right questions? How much runway do they have? Am I comfortable with, am I going to have to make a pivot again? But yeah, I think it just gives you, like, there's nothing that you can do to prevent it. And like, even as we're seeing now, like, we have people who have been in government jobs, which they have been like, I stay in this for job security. And like, I don't know if there's anywhere that you could go that will give you the security you're looking for. So if anything, it's sort of just like embracing that unknown or planning ahead.
That's so beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sharing.
That's so true. All right. Do you mind me just giving you very directive advice?
I love it.
Okay. All right. I know that high scope is a true value of yours. I've had so many conversations with you. Let's say Molly made good use of office hours. Okay. So I would say, I want you to fight for your values. Okay. I want you to fight for your values. Our values are real. And I don't want we end up sublimating them and suppressing them. And then we're not authentic anymore. I want you to fight for the value, which is going to require you to do something that's a little bit counterintuitive, which is get over it. You're probably going to get fired. All of us get fired. And I think you got to sort of be like, it happened to me. It happened to me. And it makes you a better leader and manager and human being. And then I've almost never met anyone who doesn't later say, so much good came out of it. And I will tell this one last story about it. If you've heard it before, just forgive me. All of you know about this person in my life because I talk about her all the time, my best friend, Sue Jacobson. We've been best friends since we were 18 years old together. And she had a very high-paying job at a very big advertising agency in Philadelphia. And she had literally had the corner office and was making tons of money. And Jack and I used to say to her all the time, you're going to get fired. And Jack used to say, your ass is going to get fired. You're going to get fired because you make a lot of money and you don't bring in enough business. And she was prioritizing her children at that time, and she just didn't bring in enough business. So one day I'm on the treadmill, and I'm running, and my phone keeps going off. And I have my phone across the room, so I will not be looking at my emails when I'm running. This is like 15 years ago. And, but my phone was going off so much, I finally thought, okay, that's one of the children. It has to be. And I finally got off the treadmill, really mad, and I picked it up, and she was sobbing. It was Sue. She said, it's me. And she didn't even have to say it. I said, you got fired, right? And she said, I can't believe it. Okay. She couldn't believe it. And I said to her, and she uses this line all the time. I said to her, this is the best day of your life. And she went on to build an amazing business, have an incredibly authentic life, become incredibly successful on her terms. The first year was not pretty as she reinvented herself. But she would tell you this story herself. And I think that I want you to embrace your value of high scope and let go of your identity issues around being the good girl who got fired, okay? Because even good girls get fired and even good boys get fired. It happens in this world, okay? All right. Round of applause.
Thank you.
I could do this day and night. Okay, I love that conversation with Molly. I take two things from it. The first is that sometimes we meet our values and then we feel like we might want to retreat from our values. And that's because every value has trade-offs. You know, Molly has a value of scope. Remember that line, I want an interesting life. That is the hallmark of a high scope values person. But an interesting life, look, here are the facts. An interesting life is not often a calm one or a predictable one or a controllable one. So when we are living our values, sometimes we bump into the very reason that some people don't want those same values, okay? Now, I myself, maybe I can relate to Molly so much because I have high scope. I do. But long ago, I surrendered to the chaos that comes with high scope. I did. I thought, oh, wait, something's got to give. And that was me feeling I could have any control over anything. I'll take it for my high scope. And I said, okay, that's a values deal I'm willing to make. But here's the thing. You know, you may have a value like, say, let's choose another one, like family centrism. And you may discover, wait. Having this high value of family centrism, having family as your organizing principle, first, second, and third priority. I mean, you may say having this very high value, well, that kind of gets in the way of my achievement value. And honestly, our whole life is understanding our values and how they're related to each other and working out the conflicts between them, because a lot of times we have values that are in conflict. So the other thing that I take from Molly's question is how much the fear of getting fired can show up in our lives. And I get it. I mean, the fear of getting fired, that can be having a high value of achievement, which she also had. Molly has a high value of achievement, that's seen success. And if you really value people seeing you as successful, you're really going to fear being fired. But I'm glad that Molly asked this question so that I could tell my true story and hear from other people, because I didn't understand that sometimes to become successful, we have to let ourselves get fired so we can go on to the next thing. I hope you felt encouraged by that conversation about getting fired. All right. When we come back, which is a terrible topic, by the way, I don't want to gloss over how terrible it feels to get fired. And so I don't want to gloss over it, but we do live. And sometimes we look back and it was one of the best things that ever happened to us. All right. When we come back, we'll hear from a Becoming You alum who doesn't fear getting fired at all. I mean, I think, if I remember correctly, he's been fired 6 times since he graduated. And what he fears is like the exact opposite. He fears what stability might do to him. We'll get there. Okay, welcome back. Hi. Our next question comes from Tim, who had immaculate vibes, I have to tell you. That was a sharp-dressed man, to quote the ZZ Top song. I understand that the youth listening to this podcast don't know the song Sharp Dressed Man. I would sing it to you, but that's a criminal offense, but it's a great song. Listen to it sometime. Now, before we got down to business, Tim asked a question about the evolution of becoming you. We're actually not going to include that question. It was a great one, which is sort of like, how did you get here, Professor Welch? I mean, he remembered when this was just an experiment. But if you happen to be interested in how Becoming You came to be, we have a lot of podcasts. Please go back into our archive and poke around and see all the episodes about how Becoming You came to become itself. Or may I suggest you read my book? Did I mention I have a new book? Anyway, that's one way to do it. But let's turn to Tim's main question. Hello. All right. Tell us what's going on, who you are, what's happening.
I think I was in your first cohort. Was that fall 2022?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do people become themselves multiple times?
Just to be clear, if you did not catch that, Tim asked if people could become themselves multiple times. And the answer is absolutely yes. We have to continually adapt. Now, look, there are some people for whom there is just one thing. They must be an athlete. They must be a teacher. They must be a parent. And that is all there is. And they will stay in that beautiful place of area of transcendence their whole life long, tweaking and adapting and evolving. But there are people who have certain values that by definition, they're going to keep reinventing. One of those would be very high scope. If you have high scope, you're going to over and over again. I mean, the only person I know who's had higher scope than me is Jack. And look at the reinventions. I clearly have not a fear of it. So, I'm drawn to it. And I think that as the world changes and we get to know ourselves better, and sometimes as we change, we need to reinvent. And so it can happen, and it does happen. One of the questions I get often is, do values change? And I've looked at all the literature, all the scholarly literature on it, and the answer is no one knows. Okay, but I will soon have, I believe, like within 5 years, I might have the data that can answer that question, because of the values bridge, and we'll be able to take people who took it at the very, very beginning and 5 years later and see how much movement there generally is. And in 10 years, who's ever continuing to do this work, and I hope it's me. I mean, I don't know where I'm going to be in 10 years. This brings me to one of the most hilarious stories that's ever happened in Becoming You history. Hello, it's just me interrupting myself here to explain something just briefly. At the end of every semester with Becoming You, students prepare what we call a capstone report. And it says, okay, the method identified my purpose as X, because remember, my students have gone through a lot of work to find out what their values and their aptitudes and their interests are. And then they say, okay, if that's my purpose, this is the way my life is going to unfold. They imagine their life unfolding for the next 40 years, and they use slides to illustrate the different intervals in their life. I used to let students use AI in these slides, and then they got a little over creative. Let's just put it that way. Everybody aged up very beautifully. But anyway, as a further aside, in class, we often refer to purpose. I use the word purpose in this podcast a lot, but in class, we refer to this purpose as area of transcendence, and we call it AOT for short. I just want to give you some language you're about to hear. And there's an academic explanation for why we call it AOT, but for now, let us just say that purpose and area of transcendence, or AOT, are synonyms. And now let's get back to the hilarious story. I taught Becoming You to undergraduates. Any of my undergraduates here? Hi. Oh, you'll remember this story then. Oh my God. Okay, so you can verify this story. So at the end of Becoming You, as you all know, my students at NYU stand up and they tell the story of their lives going forward for 40 years. Okay, the last date is 40 years. So I was teaching the undergraduates, and one fabulous student got up and he did all of his slides, and then he gets to the 40-year date, and he's running a jazz bar in Tokyo that like has sushi and jazz. And I said, oh my God, that's fabulous. I want to go. And I looked around, the class was dead silent as they all realized I would be dead. Okay. It had not dawned on me, and they were all like, when will she realize it, right? And then I realized it. It was awkward for a moment. But they were like, felt badly for me. It's like, oops, when is Professor Welch going to realize she's not immortal? And she will not be teaching this in 40 years and visiting her students in Tokyo. And they had that like a beat and a half before me. And anyway, so anyway, that happened, did it not? All right. So, yet another ranting tangent. Thank God on the student evaluations they don't ask, how often does your professor go on a tangent like rant, as I just have? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess more so because
Yes.
I actually just, in the audience, I read my capstone.
Yes. Oh, what did it say?
So like 5 years, like, oh, thank you for like the culmination of building. I have a brand. I started a brand before NYU.
Okay.
Brand.
It's a clothing brand? I was going to note you're quite chic.
Yes.
Okay.
I was in the fashion luxury industry.
Okay, you're fabulous.
So
okay.
I
know blue and black together is very chic. Okay, go ahead.
So I started a brand, went back to the MBA, and I was lost a little bit. And then I think like the 5 years thing was like, oh, thank you for like the press that I got when I was younger with my brand, like the culmination of building this, like here's what it is, the relaunch of it. And then like everything still stayed true, even the 35-year one. But like when I wrote that assignment, I kind of was just bullshitting it, to be honest. Like, you know.
Oh, that's the first time I've figured that out. Okay, yeah, I mean, like, there's quite a high degree of BS in some of the AOTs, but okay.
And, you know, I had to present it, and then like
Yeah.
I just read it, and I was like, you know what, like this is still very relevant. Like 5 years, this is still what I want to say, like publicly on LinkedIn. This 10 years is what I want to do. So it kind of worked out. So that's why I'm wondering, like. But I've been thinking about this, like doing my brand fully for like since I started in 2017, right? I've taken like a bunch of hiatuses. So
what's stopping you from going all in?
So I actually wanted to utilize my MBA, and I was working in the luxury industry, right? And it's been 18 months, and I'm done. I'm like, I just got fired like 2 weeks ago, so I'm just like, you know what? I'm going.
Round of applause. Okay, all right. And now you have the chance to go be you.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, you know, does that ultimately your values, like you said, I've become me multiple times, you know, but like ultimately I still want to be this version of me. You know?
Yeah, now it's time for you to unleash. Yeah. Now it's time for you.
You knew you wanted to like become a professor, like from.
You know, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was at Harvard Business School, they tried to recruit me to get my PhD and stay and be a professor there. And the recruiting dean said to me, "You're going to be an academic someday, Suzy. Why don't you just stay here and do it with us?" And I was like, money? I mean, I needed money. I didn't say it to him. I was like, I'm just going to go to Bain. And I just went off to Bain. I had a lot of identity issues with becoming a professor because my mom was a teacher. And I didn't want to go into my mom's profession for reasons that we will leave not discussed here today. But I would say I struggled with it. Jack loved teaching, and I remember literally saying I'll be anything but a teacher. And but I was told I was a teacher. And when I think about a lot of stuff that I did, when I think about me being on TV and the stuff I did on TV, and when you think about my show, I was teaching. And so I think I had to get over the identity stuff. Every single thing in Becoming You, I probably I am the beta case in many ways for having done it one way or the other. So I do think you now have permission to become you. And you knew what it was, and now it's time. And this is a perfect way actually to wrap here, is to say now it is time for all of you to become you. You've got the data, right? The hard part of doing it is when you don't have the data that we go for. You've got the value stuff, you've got the aptitude stuff, and the economically viable interest stuff. You got most of that. I cannot help you with all that much, although we have the Holland Bridge coming. You've got the data. And now it's time to gather the courage. Dare I say it? It is scary. But what is a much scarier proposition is not doing it. So it's your turn. Okay? All right. All right. So let me repeat that line. It's now your turn. It is your turn. And if you're like Molly, who's afraid of what becoming herself might entail, or if you're Tim, who wants to keep trying on new versions of himself, either way, it's your turn to keep living Becoming You. And the living of Becoming You is something you have to step into. And I don't want to be, mean or bitchy here or anything like that, because I love you. I love everyone who does Becoming You. I truly do. We're in this together. But I say this to everyone who goes through it, and I can't do the living part for you. I wish I could, but I can't. You have to step into that with your own courage and resilience and actually your data and information that you've gathered. You've got the stuff to do it, but I can't do it for you, lovingly. But I can cheer you on, and I am, and I can talk to you about anything it entails, and that's what we do here on the pod. So I'm really glad you came along to do that this week, and I hope you come back next week. And we will be back next week with more of our thinking and talking and asking hard questions about purpose. And maybe even answering some. I hope we are answering some. And so I leave you with this. Just until then, keep becoming you. Becoming You is produced by Jesse Baker and Eric Newsom of Magnificent Noise. Our production staff includes Muskan Nagpal and Kristen Muller, with help from Eliza Zinn, Hallie Reiner, Maddie Paul, and Tanya Joji. I'm your host, Suzy Welch, and this is Becoming You.